Adonai echad. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha bechol levavcha uvechol nafshecha uvechol meodecha ve'ahavta lereacha kamocha. Amen. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might, and love your neighbor as yourself. Amen. Amen. So the beam presses down on these baskets and extracts more of that oil. And this is your residue oil. By the time you get to the very end, that's what you use for lighting. So that's your worst of the worst oil. But that's what you have down below. They'll have pits. That's the deepest. So the water table is somewhat low here, but it rises during the rainy season. So right now it's probably a little bit higher or a little bit shallower. The gardener does not cut off the branches. What does the gardener do? He lifts the branches up with rocks or sticks. And as you go around and look at some of these vineyards and these vines, you can see what's going on. Why do they do that? Because as the vine grows and as the branches grow and the grapes get on there, the weight of those grapes bring the fruit down. It touches the ground, produces a fungus. But if you simply lift the grapes up, the sun will kill that fungus and you'll have good grapes again. A gardener does not want to lose their grapes. They don't want to lose those branches. And so a gardener's not going to cut it off or take it away. The gardener's going to lift it up. A knife fight. Goliath didn't have a chance. And David knew it. And you can feel, and what I love, David could have taken Adonai Elohim. Adonai Echad. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha bechol levavcha uvechol nafshecha uvechol meodecha ve'ahavta lereacha kamocha. Amen. So Jesus is probably standing that direction. So Jesus would probably be standing where we are, approximately just several feet lower, when he said, Lazarus, come out. And Lazarus would have come out this direction. Now, is this the actual tomb? We don't know for sure, but there's a lot of tradition here. It goes back to at least Byzantine, which means the same way.
Climb up and out. So there's not.
However, gates are almost always named how? By what city they face. So Jaffa Gate, right over there, Lord willing, we'll be walking through it in just a few moments, faces what city? Jaffa Gate. I can't tell you Jesus was very few places, but I think Jesus was right up there. He may have actually walked, these would have been covered most likely, but he would have walked probably on these steps as he was taking them. After we're done here, there is a traditional Via Dolorosa. P.S. You hear a lot about, my God, why have you forsaken me? As if God ever left Jesus. It's a remez. It's a remez. Read Psalm 22. And while you're at it, read John's account and tell me John didn't have Psalm 22 in front of him. Tell me Jesus wasn't reciting Psalm 22 on the cross. That begins, my God, why have you forsaken me? But ends with affirmation saying, God, you never left me. I will praise you in the assembly. You have done it. Years even before that. So Hadrian comes to this land. We've talked about him briefly at the at Bethlehem Church of the Nativity. When he comes through, he tries to destroy any memory of anything Jewish or Christian. So he comes from 132 to 132.
want the Jews to rise up again. He renames the city Aelia Capitolina, and he plants gardens dedicated to different deities. He builds temples dedicated to different deities. He does that here to Venus, the goddess of love, in this place. But when he does so, what happens? When Christianity becomes the official religion of the empire, Helena, Constantine's mom, comes here. And in 324, she commissions the Venus temple to be destroyed and a church to be built on top. Why does he build a temple to Venus here? Most likely because the first Christians remembered this as the place of Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. So Helena commissions a church to be built in 324. It was consecrated in 333 AD, and it was incredibly massive. The most impressive church of the time. That church was destroyed in 527. Another one rebuilt in its place. That one was destroyed. Another one rebuilt. This one is Crusader, probably around 1095 or 1100 AD is what this one dates to. However, it has been added upon or fractured from and added over Jesus take. So you can erase the building from your minds and put the garden tomb right there. That's the picture. I can't stand them. But it's because this is where that event, the Christ event, the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus the Messiah took place. And you can't beat that. You just can't. So we're going to make our way now back to Jaffa Gate and back to the bus. Please. That beautiful mosaic with the gray side, that's what you're looking like right now. So in the first century, you're leaning on your elbow, feet out, so I'd be sitting over here, feet out, and I'd be dipping with bread. That would be my fork. Does that make sense? So you have the salads there, that's how it would work. You'd take the bread, dip it, and eat it. Now, this makes a lot of sense when you think about the woman who was crying. You remember that? Who came in to weep over Jesus' feet? Where are his feet? Away from the table. So the food is right here, he's eating, and all of a sudden she comes to his feet. So that's what's going on there with the triclinium. Now, one fun thing to think about is where are people sitting? If it isn't a triclinium, we don't know for sure, but if it is, where are they seated? You have in which women would collect their tears, especially when their husbands go off to war. And so you can imagine a woman, let's say during the time of David, let's say Bathsheba. When David goes off to war, she is using this tear jar to collect tears, saying, and then at the end of that time period, she can say, look how much I missed you. Look how much I mourned for you, how much I wanted you to return, how worried I was about you. And so those tears represent that. We see this in the Psalms. Who is my reader for Psalm 50? Gently slap me on my right cheek. No, my right cheek.
With my left hand?
Wait. She's right-handed. She's slapping with her right hand, but what cheek is she hitting? My right. What is Jesus saying? Insult. If someone insults you, shake it off and let them slap the other one as well. It's insulting. It's like taking the gloves off and slapping people with gloves. That's the visual. Now this you have active resistance against Rome. So if someone strikes you on one cheek, the right cheek, turn to them the other also. If someone wants to sue you and take your tunic, give them your tunic, give them your cloak as well. In other words, if someone's trying to take your outer clothes, give them your underwear too. Why? To shame them once again. What does that do? It's not the person who is naked, it's the person who bears witness to double holiness, basically, is the idea. You'll see prayer boxes all over the place. Here it is divided. You have women on the right and men on the left. That doesn't have to be whatsoever between male and female in the first century. That's an important distinction to make. That only comes later. They will be praying the text, they will be reading the text, they will be praying out of their prayer books called the Siddur, and you'll see them doing this. That it's called daven is prayer, Yiddish for prayer. Or davening is an anglicized word, but they're praying is what they're doing, and when they're praying, they're moving. They're reciting the text, or prayer, they're remembering it. It's part of the memory if you associate physical action. It also is helping keeping cadence, keeping the rhythm. So you'll see that as well. Guys, you will see some arks, some wooden closets or armoires for keeping the Torah scrolls. And guys, if you want to come with me, I'll be going through over here underneath there. You can see what is known as Wilson's Arch. It's a beautiful archway created by Herod the Great. Now, guys, we can see that. The ladies get to see things that we don't get to see. There was a gate called Barclay's Gate, and ladies, if you go to the right, and there's a little entrance on the right, you may have to crowd your way in, but you should be able to see the lintel stone, the upper stone of what is known as Barclay's Gate. It's a significant gate, and I've never seen it before, so please take a picture and show me, because I want to see it. So just a little bit about what's going on here. This is considered the holiest place for Judaism. Why? It's the closest they can get to the Holy of Holies without actually standing on it. They don't go up on top, very rarely. Some of them do, against rabbinic halakha, but this is as close as they can get without going on top itself. So they'll use this wall as a place of prayer. They've been doing this for hundreds of years. Sometimes it used to be referred to as the Wailing Wall. I honestly don't know when that came up or why that is. They don't call it that, they just call it the wall. And the Western Wall, HaKotel in Hebrew. I've already spoken a little bit about the Talit or prayer shawl, but once more as a reminder, this symbolizes God's wings. It's God's covering, God's protection over His people. So it's very neat to watch as they're praying with these covering themselves or covering their sons, because it's men and women. But in the synagogue, if they're together, to be able to cover all of them. You have the tassels as well on the corners are wings. But it's a beautiful piece, a beautiful reminder of what's going on for them as they see God protecting them. Another thing you'll see is what they'll do, especially the larger ones, they'll take it and they'll wrap it around like this. When they wrap it around like that, they are going into their closet. That's their closet. So when Jesus says, go into your room and close the door, He's saying, go into your closet. Erase the distractions. He could be saying a real house too. But that's another possibility for what Jesus is talking about. Let it be distracted and focus on what's important, which is God, not what other people are thinking about you. Questions? This one is classic Herodian, 1st century BC. Do you see the difference? Whenever you see stones like this, just think Herod the Great. Just naturally think Herod the Great. This was his iconic style of stone, very smooth front, trimmed all around. Here, it's an uncarved or unfinished front, still with the trim, though not cut nearly as finely. So classic Herod the Great. So think 1st century BC, 2nd century BC. Said it's not enough to just get a taste of God. He wants all of you. You've been in the wilderness before. You know how thirsty you can get. I don't ever want you to forget that this is who God is. He is the living water in your wilderness. And he feels incredible. Stay thirsty. Stay thirsty. They said a child was ready to learn Torah. So that's when they would go to school. 5 years old, they're old enough for Torah. That doesn't mean they haven't learned anything before then. Their parents have been pouring in information. They've been going to synagogue every Saturday. They've been learning Torah, but now they're old enough to really start reciting it and learning it intensely. So they would sit here and they would recite their lessons every day. 5 years old, you're old enough for Torah.
How long would
From-
the school be like in a day? Would it be
I
every
don't
day?
know.
Would it be every day? Or
I
no?
don't know. Don't know. The question was, how long would school last every day? I have no idea. I honestly don't know. At 10 years, a child is old enough for Mishnah. So at 5 years for Torah, and then at 10 years for Mishnah. Mishnah is a second reading. The way Jews saw Mishnah, they saw God give 2 Torahs at Sinai. The written Torah and then the oral Torah are the oral tradition. So you have both of those, and they said you can't have the written Torah without the oral Torah. You may have the written words, but you need someone to explain it.
It's like a
Just-
commentary.
Do what? It's like a commentary. It's like Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch. You want me to explain what you're reading? That's Mishnah. The Mishnah helps explain what is in the written word. And so they believe God gave 2 Torahs. If you go home and read Pirkei Avot tonight, you'll understand. It's great. I'm not going to dive into it because of time, but it's so much fun. By the way, from 5 to 10 years old, when it means they're studying Torah, what does that mean? They're memorizing it. They're memorizing it. I was eating lunch while I was living here. I was eating lunch with a guy named Bill Schlegel who wrote a pretty good geography book, Satellite Bible Atlas. And he invited a Yemenite Jew to lunch. Now, Jews from Yemen are known to be exceptionally good with the text. They have great knowledge of the Bible. So this Yemenite Jew shows up at lunch and he starts talking about how the granddads would compete on which grandson would be reading from Torah first in synagogue. I said, really? So you were kind of in competition with fellow children or whatever? He said, yeah. I said, well, how old were you? He said, I was 3. Oh. Was he reading Torah? No. He was reciting it.
Yeah, 3 you can't read.
You can read at 3, but I've heard of extreme cases, but he's reciting the text. I remember, I'll tell you another story that blew my mind. So when my roommate was dating a girl from Yemen, a Yemenite Jew, and I said, how many of you have seen Prince of Egypt? There's a song in there toward the end, and it has There Can Be Miracles, and there's a bridge there that breaks into Hebrew. And it goes, Ashira la Adonai ki ga'oga. I was like, okay, that sounds like Hebrew. I'm learning Hebrew. I'm going to ask. And I asked my roommate, I said, hey, I found this, I heard this song. Is it in the Bible anywhere? He said, I have no idea, but I'll ask my girlfriend. She'll know. She's Yemenite. Okay. So he asks her. And he couldn't remember. He said he couldn't remember what my question was or what the song was. And so he said, Jeff, and she came over to the apartment. And he said, Jeff, ask her your question because you had a question. And I said, yes. Ashira la Adonai kigo. Is that in the Bible? Oh yeah, that's Miriam's song, Exodus 15. Because they know the text. So if you can imagine a 10-year-old Jesus, he's walking around. Nice lizard. He's walking, don't eat that one. That's a bad one. Unclean. He's walking around reciting he has the Torah memorized, the first 5 books of the Bible. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Any of you have one of those memorized yet? Maybe?
Catechism. Still working on the Shema.
Still working on the Shema. Awesome. That's awesome. That's how seriously they take the text. So from 10 years old to 13 years old, you're working on, well, really through 15 years old, but 10 years old, Mishnah. At 13 years old, you're ready to fulfill the commandments. We call it, you've heard of it, Bar mitzvah. Bar mitzvah, 13 years old.
That's correct.
So now you're going to ask, but Jesus was 12. Yes, he was, and I'll talk about that, Lord willing, later. So 13 years old, the fulfilling of the commandments. In other words, you are taking on the yoke of the commands. You are now an adult. You are taking on responsibility. We would call it either confirmation or baptism or something like that. I don't know exactly how Ephraim does that, but it would be that level of taking on responsibility for your own spiritual well-being. At 15 years old, you're old enough for Talmud. So from 10 years to 15, you're not only studying Torah, you're also reading and studying the other Old Testament books and committing them to memory.
What's the Talmud?
Talmud, good question. The Talmud is a body of literature that was written later. Okay, so it wasn't written in the time that this was even written down in Mishnah. It was composed later, but again, it's a reflection on the past. But the Talmud, you have two of them, one written in Tiberias, one written in Babylon. Two different Talmuds, but it is a commentary on Mishnah, which is an interpretation of Torah. Is that clear as mud right now? You have Torah, I'll tell you in just a second. And then you have Mishnah, which helps explain Torah. And Mishnah is a second reading. It means second. Then you have Talmud, Talmud. And Talmud is a commentary on the interpretation of Torah. Clear as crystal now. It's all about how to live right, how to walk well, how to obey the commands is what it's about.
The oral would be from much earlier, probably.
Much of it, yes, the commentary. However, it was composed in 500 for the later one, the Babylonian, and 400 for the earlier one, which is Tiberias. So 400s, 500s, the Talmud was being composed. But you have two of them. Okay. So 10 to 15 years, you are learning the rest of the Hebrew Bible. The Samuels and Kings. You're learning the prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah. You're learning the rest of the Hebrew Bible. 10 to 15. And continue as well. At 18 years old, you're old enough for marriage. 18, old enough for marriage. So this is about boys, by the way. So tell me, Joseph, if we don't go with tradition, how old would he have been about?
At least 18.
18 years old, give or take. Give or take. Now, ladies, you would be going to school until menstruation. So after your first period, that's when you would get married. And you wouldn't go to school anymore. You would still learn, though we do have some instances in Talmud that talk about a woman rabbi. So it seems that at least in the 5th century, 6th century, women were being educated.
Was it common or just
Do what?
Women becoming rabbis?
Not common at all. You do not have women disciples. There's one rabbi in Jewish literature that had woman disciples. And there's one woman who is a rabbi. So it's uncommon, but it does show up. Yes?
Where did bat mitzvahs fit in?
12 years old, about bat mitzvah. Again, that first period, it's a celebration of adulthood. You have now reached the age of childbearing age. At 12, 13. But remember, Mishnah says at 12, marry your daughter. 12 and a half, she's getting old for your slave, so you can marry her so she doesn't become an old maid.
So bar mitzvah would be for both boys and girls?
Yes. Bar mitzvah for boys, bat mitzvah for daughters, or for girls. Okay, so marriage,
What exactly is bar mitzvah?
bar mitzvah means son of the command. But it's Aramaic bar, but ben mitzvah. 20 years, you're old enough to take on the family business, trade. It's 20 years, you take on the family trade. And at 30 years old, you take on authority or power. So that goes through a little bit of the life state. They have more, 40 for full strength, or not full strength, 40 for, I can't remember, 60, 80. At 120, you've outlived everything. You better die fast, is what it says. 80, I think, is special strength. They say a special strength. And remember, elders are respected. So the older you are, the more respected you are, generally. Until 120, apparently. Good question. Let's talk about that. Education for, let's do disciples first. So around age 15, as you're taking on Beit Talmud, and so now you're mastering, you've mastered Torah already by age 10, because that was so last year. And then from 10 to 15, you're learning the rest of the Old Testament, and that comes to you pretty quickly. The Mishnah says, out of 1,000 students that do that first level, Torah, only one makes it to the next level. Out of 1,000 students at the next level, only one makes it to the next level. So now we've narrowed things down significantly, right? So out of and again, this is written post-time period, so you need to take it maybe with a grain of salt. But understand, only the cream of the crop get to Beit Talmud, or to the time of Talmud, 15 years old, and still studying. That means these are the best. These are people like Paul. Paul made it this far. He was the cream of the crop student. So I don't know what the percentage is, what that would look like, but so 0.1% would make it out of the first. Is that correct? Out of the first school, and then 0.1% out of that 0.1% would make it to the next level. So you're not talking a whole lot of people.
So when you say the first level,
Most likely it is when you're around the age of 15. Maybe a little bit earlier, but 15 and on. 15 and on, you would try to be a disciple, or in Hebrew, a Talmid. Now, what does it mean to be a Talmid? It means you go to a rabbi, and you say, "Great Rabbi so-and-so, your reputation has preceded you. You are known throughout the world. May I ask you a question?" "Yes, please ask." "May I follow you?" And the rabbi will say, "Well, recite Genesis." And you say, "That was so 5 years old." And so you recite Genesis like it was nothing. Say, "Okay, great. Recite 1 Kings." So you recite 1 Kings. All right, recite Nehemiah, but then recite Deuteronomy, where Nehemiah is quoting Deuteronomy 17 times, and the context around that. And you're going, "Man, I missed that day in class." And the rabbi will say, "You are a good man. Keep studying, keep learning, but you don't have what it takes to follow me right now." And so the Talmid would go to the rabbi. Yes.
so when the two disciples go to Jesus and ask him, where do you live? Is that kind of them approaching?
Maybe. I'm going to read the passage of Jesus and the disciples later, but we all know what Jesus does, right? What does he do? He doesn't wait for disciples
He calls them.
to come ask him. He goes and calls disciples. So who is my reader for John 15, 16 through 17?
That's me.
Please read that one for us. Listen to Matthew chapter 21, 23 through 27. Who is my reader for that? Great. Thanks for hanging in there. We're almost done.
Yeah, thank you. Jesus entered the temple courts, and while he was teaching, the chief priests and elders of the people came to him. "By what authority are you doing these things?" they asked. "And who gave you the authority?" Jesus
Okay, wait, just a second. What's the question? What idiot rabbis passed on transferred authority to you because we need to get them. What is going on? Who gave you this authority? And so Jesus says in classic Eastern way,
I'll also ask you one question. If you answer me, I will tell you by what authority I'm doing these things. John's baptism, where did it come from? Was it from heaven or from men?
okay, stop right there. So Jesus does a classic Eastern thing, right? He says, I'm going to ask you a question. If you answer me, I'll tell you where my authority comes from. And what does he ask? John the Baptist, where did he get his authority? Question. Did he answer their question?
Yeah, he did.
Keep reading.
They discussed it among themselves and said, if we say from heaven, he will ask, then why didn't you believe him? But if we say from men, we're afraid of the people, for they all hold that John was a prophet. So they answered Jesus, we don't know. Then he said, neither will I tell you by what authority I'm doing these things.
So it's a game. They ask a question, Jesus asks a question. They don't answer, and Jesus says, fine, I'm not going to answer either. But he does. John the Baptist is where I got my authority. What are you going to do about it? When did he get his authority from John the Baptist?
Baptized in the Jordan.
But John the Baptist wasn't the only one there. Every matter must be established by 2 or 3 witnesses according to Deuteronomy. Who else is there at Jesus' baptism?
The Father and the Spirit.
Father is there, the Holy Spirit.
John was there, and Jesus looked up, and heaven was ripped open, and God said, this is my Son. And the Spirit floated down like a dove, reminiscent of Genesis 1, and lighted on him. Where did Jesus get his authority? Was it from heaven or from men? It was both. One of my mentors, a guy named Ray Vanderlaan, tells this story, and he said, I went to a yeshiva, a rabbinic school, and there were 33 people in the classroom, 32 of them had black hats, black suits, had tassels, had the phylacteries and all of that. One of us was in Dockers and a polo. But it was Chaim Potok's class.
Can you say that again? What class?
Chaim Potok, he's an author of several books, but he wrote The Chosen, if any of you have seen the movie or read the book, The Chosen. But he was in that class, and Potok walks in and says to the guy in the front row, recite Genesis. And Ray is like, recite Genesis? Are you kidding me? So the boy stands up and starts reciting Genesis and says, Bereshit bara Elohim, stop. In the beginning created God, stop. If you don't believe that, he said, there's the door. We are here to become men of God, not just here to get a degree. And if you're here just to get a degree, you know we have rectal thermometers, and you know what we do with those. So that was his context. And he said, I was humiliated every day because he would ask me different questions about, what does Jesus say about that? What does Jesus say about that? What does Jesus say about that? And he didn't know. And they were talking about authority and how that's passed on from generation and different people that passed it on and passed it on. And he said, hey, Ray, where did Jesus get his authority? I was like, I don't know. And he said, Ray, stand up. He said, guys, I want you to know something. Ray is the only one here whose rabbi got his authority directly from God himself. Ray said, I walked out a little bit taller that day. So Jesus' authority comes from God. John the Baptist is there as well. There are 3 witnesses present. Passing on, transferring authority to Jesus. Now, Jesus was a rabbi, and he had some Talmidim, some disciples. And we're going to close right here. What does it mean to be a disciple, a Talmid? Culturally, you are to be exactly like your rabbi. When a guy asks a rabbi, can I follow you? They're asking, do you think I can be like you? And the rabbi will then give a response, yes or no. Jesus chooses 12 guys, and some women, by the way. Jesus is the other rabbi who has women disciples. And says, I think you can be just like me. I don't think it ended with the disciples either. Because at the Great Commission, possibly and most likely right on top of that mountain up there, on Mount Arbel where you were, Jesus says to his disciples, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. That's a whole lot of authority, by the way. All of it's been given to me. I now give it to you. Now go and make Talmidim of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded, and surely I'm with you always, forever, to the very ends of the earth. The key word in this Greek syntax for this verse here, make Talmidim, make disciples. Did I include teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you? I may have missed that part, and I apologize. Teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you as well. I got it. But the key word, go make Talmidim. Not converts, Talmidim. And I'm going to sum up some of the other passages that I asked you to read. But 2 Peter, well, let's read them. 1 Peter 2:21. Who is that one? Also, 1 Corinthians 11:1, be ready. And then we'll end with Acts 19.
For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example, so that you might follow in his steps.
Follow in his steps. Walk like he walked. If you want to know what Jesus thought, you got to read the Bible. You got to read the 4 gospel narratives. If you want to know what Jesus thought and what he taught, you have to have it in you. You have to drink his words in like honey. Another one. Paul, a Talmid of Jesus, a disciple of Jesus, though he was later, post-resurrection, post-ascension. Listen to what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 11, verse 1.
Follow my example as I follow the example of Christ.
Paul said, I'm a Talmid of Jesus. So much so that the direction I'm walking and the way I'm walking, you just follow right behind me because of what? I'm following, Paul says, right behind Jesus. If you want to know what it looks like to follow Jesus, just follow me, Paul says. How many of us can say that? I want to be able to say that so badly. Just follow me. Because I'm so close to Jesus. I'm eating his dust right now. By the way, I'm going to sum up Acts 19. Paul does it to such an extent that when he gets to a place called Ephesus, there's some disciples of John there. And they don't know what the Holy Spirit is. They don't know what's going on. And Paul's like, man, you guys are crazy. By the way, John having disciples in Ephesus, that's kind of impressive. John the Baptist is pretty cool. He has disciples in Ephesus. That's a big deal. Paul says, no, we need to do a new baptism here. How many are there? If Paul wants to be just like Jesus, how many do you think there were?
At least 12.
Luke says there were about 12 of them. There may have been 40. There could have been 2. It's about 12 because Jesus had his 12. Paul is following in the very footsteps of Jesus. Trying to. And so that's what I implore us all to do. Let's follow right after Jesus. Let's follow in his halakha, his way. I'll talk more about that, Lord willing, a little bit later today. But that's something of what a rabbi is in the first century, and that's something of what a Talmud is. Talmud is not a convert. They're already saved. They're already within the Jewish system. They're already saved. But a Talmud is someone who wants to be just like the rabbi. We have converts in Christianity. Many of them. Jesus is looking for some disciples. One more story as we close. Ray was at a lecture here in Jerusalem from a guy named David Flusser. For those of you who don't know, David Flusser was a Jewish scholar at Hebrew University, brilliant man who studied the life of Jesus. The man spoke about 18 languages, gave lectures in 12, and knew Jesus much better than I did, in a way. But he said he was giving this lecture to some Jewish students, and Ray was in the group. And I don't think Flusser knew, at least Ray doesn't think Flusser knew that he was in the audience. And Flusser said, any Christian, anyone who claims to be a follower of Jesus and doesn't read all 4 Gospels once a week is a hypocrite. How can they proclaim to know who he is when they don't even know what he does or what he says? I don't think you're all hypocrites if you don't read it every one once a week. But I want you to hear the passion and intensity that a Jewish scholar in Jerusalem practiced when he studied Jesus. And he had many Christian friends, and they would constantly ask him, can Jesus not be your Messiah too? He said, he is my rabbi, but I can't claim him as my Messiah. I can't claim him as my Messiah, as my Lord and Savior. But if a Jew is doing that, I want to know Jesus better. I think there are other ways to know him outside of I think he reveals himself in many ways, don't get me wrong, and I don't think you're a hypocrite. I don't think you're not a disciple for not reading the gospel narratives at least once every 3 months. Or more even. But I want you to hear the passion and intensity that in this culture they practice that. That's this first century culture. I don't even do that. I try, but I don't do that. Questions, comments, thoughts? These buns are tired. Yes.
How would we detect them?
It's different today than it was in the first century. But yes, you will see many rabbis, and many people are called rabbi even if they're not rabbi. It's now even just a sir term. But yes, at the Western Wall, you may see some older gentlemen teaching some younger ones, or they'll follow him around. And I think you were at Machpelah when you saw were you there 2 years ago when an older gentleman was teaching some of the students? That's a rabbi with his Talmudim.
Byzantine. When you say Byzantine, it's about
Byzantine, 4th century. 324 to 638. Give or take a couple of years. So, one, you see the beautiful view. This is a mountain. We are on a very high hill. There's plenty of room, plenty of space for people to come and learn from Jesus. Again, tradition. It's so maybe not a whole lot of stock. It could definitely work. To me, it makes a little more sense that Jesus would go to Mount Arbel, not this place, but it is closer to the towns and more accessible for larger crowds. So this sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5 through 7, is Jesus' halakha. This is Jesus' halakha. If we, as followers of Jesus, lived out this sermon, it would change the world. It would change the world. So we're going to read it together. And there are many things culturally going on that I would love to talk about, but for the sake of time, we're going to bypass a lot of them. I'll hit a couple of things here and there. But we're going to read this together, and we'll do like popcorn. So we'll read a few verses, and then read a section, kind of makes sense, or a paragraph, and then stop, and we'll let the next person read from there. So let's begin, however, not in Matthew chapter 5, but in Matthew chapter 4, and set up the context. Matthew chapter 4, beginning in verse 23.
Jesus went through Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness among the people. News about him spread all over Syria, and people brought to him all who were ill with various diseases, those suffering severe pain, the demon-possessed, those having seizures, and the paralyzed, and he healed them. Large crowds from Galilee, the Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and the region across the Jordan followed him.
Seeing the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him. And he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted.
Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth.
Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled.
Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy.
Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God.
Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God.
Blessed are they that have been persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you.
You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and not
You are the light of the world.
A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house.
In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven.
Think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law, till all be fulfilled.
Therefore, anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches others accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great
certainly not into the kingdom of heaven.
Heard that it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother or sister will be subject to judgment.
Again, anyone who says to his brother, Raka, is answerable to Sanhedrin. But anyone who says, you fool, you will be in danger of the fire of hell.
Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to your brother, then come and offer your gift.
Settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. Do it while you are still with him on the way, or he may hand you over to the judge. And the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison.
And if that happens, you surely won't be free again until you have paid the last penny.
You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart.
If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. If your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go to hell.
It has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality makes her the victim of adultery, and anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery.
Again, you have heard it that was said to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but keep the oaths you have made to the Lord. But I tell you, do not swear at all, either by heaven, or it is by God's throne, or by earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. You do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. Simply let your yes be yes, and your no, no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one.
You have heard that it was said, eye for eye, and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, then 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you.
You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust.
Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others, to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven.
What verse are we supposed to be on? 6:2. 6:2. Oh, we skip 47?
If you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect.
Sorry.
Beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them, for then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven.
So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honored by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. And when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that you're giving in secret, and your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And when you pray, do not be like hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you.
think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask Him. This then is how you should pray.
Do it together.
Yeah.
Our
Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also forgive those who and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever.
For if you forgive men when they sin against you, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive men their sins, your Father will not forgive your sins.
And when you fast, do not look gloomy like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces, that their fasting may be seen by others. Truly I say to you, that they have received the reward. But when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face. That your fasting may not be seen by others, but by your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you.
Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also.
The eye is the lamp of the body, so if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. And then the light in you is darkness. How great is the darkness?
No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money.
Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more important than food, and your body more important than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap, or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Who of you, by worrying, can add a single hour to their life?
And why do you worry about clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow? They do not labor or spin, yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all of his splendor was dressed like one of these. That is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire. And will not much more clothe you, you of little faith.
So do not worry, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the pagans run after these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well.
Therefore, don't worry about tomorrow, because tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own.
Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you.
Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye, and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when at the time there is a plank in your own eye?
You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Do not give dogs what is sacred. Do not throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces.
Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened to you.
For everyone who asks receives, the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks the door will be opened.
Or what man is there of you, whom if his son asks bread, he will give him a stone? Or if he asks a fish, will he give him a serpent? If ye then, being evil, know how to give good gifts unto your children, how much more shall your Father which is in heaven give good things to them that ask him?
So in everything do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets.
Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate, and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it.
Watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. By their fruit you will recognize them.
People pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles. Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. The good tree cannot bear bad fruit. A bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus, by their fruit, you will recognize them.
Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven.
Many will say to me that on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and perform many miracles? And I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers.
Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on a rock. The rains came, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house, yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock.
But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them in practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash.
When Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, because he taught as one who had authority, and not as their teachers of the law. When Jesus came down from the mountainside, large crowds followed him. A man with leprosy came and knelt before him and said, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. I am willing, he said, be clean. Immediately he was cleansed of his leprosy. Then Jesus said to him, see that you don't tell anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer the gift Moses commanded as a testimony to them. Is that he pronounced over them the priestly blessing. A blessing in which God said, I want you to say these words so that you will set my name on the people. Would you please stand? As we leave Galilee and set our faces to Jerusalem, I don't want you to forget these words. In synagogues to this day, you will see at this time of blessing, if there is a priest in the synagogue, you will see families gather together, and the patriarch will take his prayer shawl. This idea of God's covering, the symbol of God's covering, and he will surround his wife and his children and his grandchildren. As a priest in the congregation will sing these words. Yevarechecha Adonai ve'yishmerecha Yair Adonai panav elecha v'chunecha Yisa Adonai panav elecha vayasem lecha shalom. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face turn toward you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift his face toward you and give you peace. Amen. Amen. Go home and make Talmidim. Amen. Did, and on the way to that house, a woman came up and started talking to a guy in Hebrew. This was when we had just moved there. And he said, "Are you Jewish?" I said, "No." "Is your mother Jewish?" "No." "Your grandmother?" "No." "Great-grandmother?" "No." "Great-great-grandmother?" "No." "Okay, you're good." So I went to this lady's house, and I opened the refrigerator. They said, "Open the refrigerator." So I opened the refrigerator. They said, "Flip that switch." I flipped the switch. And now, when she opens and closes the refrigerator, the light won't come on. Because that's lighting a fire. Any use of electricity like that is lighting a fire. And you say, that is absolutely ridiculous, and what a pain in the petunias. In a way, yes. But here, that's the halakha. That's the way that Orthodox Judaism has gone. And so Orthodox Jews take that on and say, we're not going to light any sort of fire whatsoever. So we're not going to press the button on the elevator. Which is why they have Shabbat elevators that stop at every floor on the way up and all the way, every floor on the way down. Same place where Solomon's temple stood. And it would have been much taller, and you can see that it's covered in gold, and it took place in 94. The temple, Josephus says, was covered in gold, so you can imagine on a day like today, as that sun is rising in the east to your right, that temple would have shone like a light to the world. So the song goes, my voice is really bad right now, and I just wore it out quite a bit from the wind there, but it's something like this, and I'm not completely accurate, but go to any synagogue today, and this is the song you will hear. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. And then they keep going. And so the Shema is longer than that, but that at least gives you the idea of what it sounds like when they're singing the text. So any synagogue you go to, they will be singing Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, b'chol levacha, u'v'chol nafshecha, u'v'chol me'otecha. And then they keep going. And so the Shema is longer than that, but that at least gives you the idea of what. Let everything that is done, whether in word or deed, be done in the name of Dionysus. We try to, when we're either doing a boat ride or something, we'll have some fish on the shore waiting, just to kind of have that experience. So we told Majed about that. He said, "Fish, let's do the whole thing. Let's make this the real deal," which is classic Middle Eastern hospitality right here. But I want us to listen to the words of Jesus one more time. I kind of did this teaching already with the reinstating of Peter and Jesus, how he says, "Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? Feed my lambs, take care of my sheep, feed my sheep." Afterward, this is beginning in verse 1, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus, the twin, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples were together. "I'm going out to fish," Simon Peter told them, and they said, "We'll go with you." So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. By the way, whenever Jesus shows up with these guys who are fishermen, professional fishermen, they never catch a thing. They're like the worst fishermen in the world. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. So Jesus here, the disciples are out, and their fishing technique is specific. I didn't get into fishing or the different kinds of fish you are eating, specifically tilapia, which is a kind of fish native to this lake. So they're out there fishing a certain way. They're professional. They know how to do it. But Jesus says, early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" "No," they answered. I think they really said, "Shut up," but the text says no. He said, "Throw your net on the right side of the boat and you will find some." In other words, throw your net into open water, which is the exact opposite of what you're supposed to do. When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved, a.k.a. John, said to Peter, "It is the Lord." As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, "It is the Lord," he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. I don't know for sure even if the disciples knew how to swim. Again, this represents I think it's brilliant that Jesus chooses fishermen, because they're the ones that deal with the altar, in essence saying, "You can't kill me, you can't kill me." Did everyone get their picture?
Yeah, I got it.
Shoot! Did you get one? For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life will gain it. What good is it for you to gain the whole world, but forfeit your soul? What will you give in exchange for your soul? The text doesn't say this, but I think he turns around. Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'odecha ve'ahavta le'reacha kamocha. Amen. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might, and love your neighbor as yourself. Amen. Amen.
On a day when so many are mourning, and are reminded also of the lights today. So let's pray this Shema prayer and invite God's kingdom to come through us. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, B'chol levavcha, u'b'chol nafshecha, u'b'chol me'odecha, Ve'ahavta le'reacha kamocha. Amen. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might, and love your neighbor as yourself. Amen.
First century house in Judea. Now we're in Ephraim, the tribal territory of Ephraim, but the landscape is similar enough. So you'll notice a couple of things that we've talked about. One, what's underneath? Manger livestock. So you keep your animals underneath. And when we go behind you, you'll see just how deep the valley was. Keep coming in. So you get an idea of what it would have been like inside. There used to be, we would come right through that door on the screen and come down through here, down to your right. Today they go all the way around, and I love it. But you can see here, it's kind of like construction workers on highways. Today, everyone's sitting around except for one. Just kidding, just kidding. But you can see how it would have looked as their guess. Middle Bronze Age, once again, 3,800 years ago. We're thinking 1800, 1750 BC. This opens it up and shows you what it would have looked like. You can see the wall of the city in the background. You can see the tower, the tunnel that led, or the channel basically, that led down steps into the large fortress tower where the spring was, which you have to protect from enemies. and then next to it would have been the pool to the left, which you just went through. The question was asked, why didn't they just build the wall around? Because you're too close to the valley. An enemy can lodge stones from the Mount of Olives. They can hit you with arrows from the Mount of Olives over the wall into the city if you build the city this low. So they had to keep the walls up there where you see them. Now we see the Kidron Valley to your left and right. The water is flowing the wrong direction, but what can you do? So the Kidron Valley, the water would go to your left, but it would start up here on the right and make its way down, and this Kidron Valley would have led, and where those three valleys met, where we were there with the bus, where the Hinnom Valley, the Tyropoeon Valley, and the Kidron Valley meet, would have been a beautiful garden called the King's Garden, built by Solomon. The channel that some of you, the dry tunnel, Hezekiah, and it gives you an artist's rendition of what it would have looked like in Solomon's time and a little bit after, before Hezekiah. You can see the large palace. The large palace there that we just looked at, and then Solomon's palace complex here before moving into the temple that he constructed. The two columns that you see, what are their names? They symbolize the legs, the shins of God. That God is seated on his throne and his shins are hitting the ground where his feet, connect to his feet, which are hitting the ground. So the Kidron Valley, it's as if we were standing from the Mount of Olives looking on. So that gives you an idea of the city of David from Solomon to Hezekiah. Hezekiah expands it big time. Big time. Gabriel Barkai. Anything that I teach you that's correct about Jerusalem, I learned from him. And anything I mess up that you Google later, that's my fault. So this man will forget far more than I will ever know. He is a walking encyclopedia of information, but not only is he massively intelligent and knows so much, he is also a wonderful human being, an amazing man. He was my professor at Hebrew University, but he is now also my friend. And I'll ask right now that you can keep it in mind. His beloved Esther had a stroke several months ago and has not done too well. So if you could please keep Esther in your prayers. And that has definitely changed his life as of late. So a very special...
That after such an introduction, I'm futile.
Don't worry, he's leaving.
Welcome to Jerusalem.
Thank you.
Myself,